Welcome to the Low Carb MD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome back to the Low Carb MD podcast. Today we have a special guest who's going to teach us. I think it's one of the most critically important areas that I deal with in medicine. People forget about that the brain is attached to the body and that how our mental outlook can affect us, and all the struggles that people have right now, especially after the last 3 years. I think we're seeing a huge uptick in mental illness, anxiety, stress. Seeing each other as vectors and all this kind of stuff. So Matt Codde, welcome, man. It's great to have you. And for people who don't know you, give a little background. And anyone who's missing Tro right now, don't worry, he's coming. He just had a little emergency, so he's taking care of that. So Matt,
Yeah.
welcome. We could maybe psychoanalyze Tro while he's gone.
Yeah. No, well, thank you so much for having me. So yeah, again, my name's Matt Codde, and I'm the founder of Restored Minds. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and really my specialty is helping people with OCD and anxiety really kind of break out of this loop and really get back their life, right? Because with OCD and anxiety, it can really be something that once you get caught in that cycle, in that loop, I mean, it can really just take over. And I'm really excited, like I was sharing a little few minutes ago, to get a chance to talk with you both today, because I think a big aspect I mean, there's so much overlap in mental health, physical health, emotional health, right? Like, and I think anyone that takes the approach of like, we just practice from this one aspect is letting out, they're leaving so much on the table, right? And there's so much that can be integrated from every aspect to really just incorporate health. Because I think that's what we're all really after, just being healthy, right? And so obviously I tend to really focus and my work tends to focus on the mental and emotional aspect of it. And so being able to talk with you guys today and learn about integrating a more diet and nutrition standpoint is I think just going to benefit so many people.
Yeah, and what
So
drew you to this area? What's your background that you said, "Hey, look, I really see a need here," or did
yeah.
you have any personal struggles or
Oh,
anything that brought you into
uh,
this field?
yeah, big time. So I would say like when I was about 18, right when I had started college, I remember it was my freshman year of college, and for most people that have a real significant experience with mental health, a lot of times you can remember like the exact time and day when a lot of things started. And for me, I had just started freshman year, community college. Just had no idea what I was going to be doing. Felt directionless. Just kind of a lot of my friends went off to nice schools, and I just I wasn't good in school. You know what I mean? And I just didn't know. Like I just kind of felt like I was drifting. Kind of just not having real no aim in life, if you will. And then just kind of my world really got flipped upside down. um, I started having just panic attacks, started getting a ton of intrusive thoughts, and I didn't know what I was experiencing. I think that was like, one of the reasons that I am so passionate about the work that I do now is because I was just having these experiences and I knew it was internal. I knew other people weren't having these same experiences, right? It was very obvious to me that I was like experiencing, and I also knew that I wasn't experiencing that prior to this time either. So there was the juxtaposition of like, something's really off here, right? And I was doing everything I could to just essentially fight off intrusive thoughts, get rid of anxiety. Um, Obviously it started impacting my sleep and I started isolating. And then as that time went on, I became depressed, or kind of entered into what I would call like a depressive episode. And from there, I was just on this journey of like, hey, how can I get better? And I went to multiple therapists. I went to the therapist on school and all this stuff. And you know, it was a very long journey to finally getting to the point where I finally understanding even what was going on, and then actually figuring out how to actually implement strategies and tools and techniques to heal my nervous system, again, get my mind to a place where it was calm and relaxed and really just regulating my entire body. And so that was really my journey, and that was a multiple year journey for me. And what my objective is in my work, obviously, is really through the podcast and the education that we put out on the OCD and anxiety show and on YouTube. My hope is that it gets to connect with people that are experiencing that, so they at least understand what they're experiencing. And then obviously through my book and then our 12-week program, really teaching people the skills they need to integrate and how to work at this appropriately to really get results. And that's really, I think, just what we're after, is just helping people get results. Because a lot of people think that it's just, it's going to therapy and talking about it. And actually that's really not the case. When it comes to most OCD and anxiety, what it's really about is, from my perspective, is giving people the tools they need to become their own therapist. And they need to be able to regulate. They need to know how to handle thoughts, what to do with feelings, the behavioral aspects, to make sure that this loop really isn't forming. And if it is forming, how to break it.
Yeah,
Does
it's
that
such a
make
huge
sense?
thing. Yeah, it makes a huge sense. And I think that's, as a doc, that's why I struggle with. I look at, things I'm treating and how much is related to mental outlook, how much is anxiety, OCD, these kind of things. And man, when you're stressed out and you can't sleep, you
Yeah,
understand why Michael Jackson was shooting Propofol, right? And
sure.
some of these people, like, to be sleep deprived, it's a
Hmm.
cycle, right? Where you're sleep deprived, you get anxious, then you get sleep deprived, you get sleep deprived, you get more anxious, and then
Right.
obviously we're throwing other things into the mix, like drugs and alcohol, and
Caffeine
and poor
and
coping
alcohol. Yeah,
mechanisms.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah,
how do we
absolutely.
break that cycle in someone who's stressed out right now? Like right now, especially during the holidays, everyone's stressed out and running around and
Right.
uptight and not sleeping.
Right. Well, you know, when you when you begin to look at the whole OCD and anxiety cycle, you first obviously need to understand the nervous system, right? And we have this nervous system, right? Very intelligent system, and it's really designed to keep us safe and alive. And what happens, and so how I understand OCD and anxiety is really, I don't see fear as a disease, right? I think that's the first thing. Is a lot of times we see these more challenging emotions that we all experience, and we pathologize them, right? We throw these labels like they're a disorder or disease. And because if someone's experiencing anxiety, I don't we don't need to harp on the idea that they have a disorder. Like, the presence of anxiety is not a quote unquote disorder, right? Like, what happens is when this loop forms, if you're in the loop long enough, it creates disorder in your life. Is the best way I try to explain it to people. Because a lot of success in anything, especially, like, as it's first, we need to understand what the problem is, and then implement the solution to the correct problem, right? A lot of times we're trying to solve the wrong problem, and that actually leads us into more problems, or not getting the results that we want. So when it comes to OCD and anxiety, I really see it from a loop perspective. And the loop includes four main components, right? So usually you have a thought that's generally past or future oriented, usually future oriented. And like, so with sleep anxiety, for instance, just going off that example, someone has a bad night of sleep, the thought pops up middle of the day, next day, well, what if I don't sleep tonight? Right. And then the fear kicks in, right? The anxiety kicks in. And this is when your stress response, right? Your sympathetic nervous system is activating. And then that energy is really in your body. And then ultimately they do some kind of safety behavior or compulsion to gain relief from that feeling of anxiety. And the problem is that twofold. Number one, when you do a safety behavior or compulsion, it validates that thought was actually a danger, right? So then your brain's learning, okay, well, this is really a dangerous situation. So you're conditioning your brain to really understand that this is dangerous, right? Or this is a issue. And number two, you're also learning that because I did that behavior, it helped me stay safe, because you notice that emotional shift or that energetic shift in your body. So using a very prototypical example of OCD, someone who, let's say, touches a doorknob, and they feel they have this what if thought of, okay, well, what if I get COVID? What if I get AIDS? What if I get this disease, right? I touch this doorknob, and they have this fear that pops up next to it. then they wash their hands. Well, they're training themselves to, again, the doorknob is dangerous. Washing my hands kept me safe. And the issue is that cycle grows. And then it goes from washing your hands once to washing it for 3 hours under scalding water eventually, or, just using Perel where your hands are all cracked, paradoxically actually making you more susceptible, right, to infection and stuff. So this is why, how I look at it, it's never the content of the fear itself that we're really working on. It's really the energy of fear that we're really helping people master, and like the emotion of fear. And what happens a lot of times for people is that if we believe we don't have the capacity to handle an emotion, or if we don't feel it's safe to handle, like, experience an emotion, or if we feel it's socially inappropriate, we have this ability as humans to essentially suppress and repress emotions in our system, right? So, if you grow up in a house where it's not okay, or you believe it's not okay to feel anger, or if good kids don't get angry, when you notice a sensation of anger and it's threatening to your well-being potentially with your caregivers, you're going to suppress or repress it, right? Push it down in your system. The issue is what you push down in the nervous system must come up, right? So with anxiety and fear, a lot of people, what's actually happening is they've pushed so much down in their system, in their nervous system over time, that eventually it's just coming up. And that's why a lot of people will say, well, the anxiety just came up out of nowhere, right? Like it just popped up. And then what happens is, instead of handling it from a bodily perspective and actually allowing the nervous system to release and process the energy, we project it onto our environment. And we then falsely assume that the environment is causing the emotion, right? So like the person will assume, hey, well, that doorknob caused my anxiety. And I'll say, well, if it was a true cause and effect relationship, then if I touch the doorknob, I should get anxious too, right? Because the doorknob caused anxiety. And then when I do and I don't get anxious, we begin to work at it and challenge it from a perspective of, actually, this is about not engaging in safety behaviors and validating to our nervous system that we're in danger, but then also learning how to release and process the emotions correctly.
Yeah, and finding a way to deal with those in a better way. So what Tro and I deal with a lot with people with obesity, diabetes, these things, and they
Yeah.
have a hard day at work. They're sad. Their coping mechanism is food, or a lot of
Food.
it may be food. Like, I
Sure.
need a,
Right.
I feel better when I have a hamburger and I remember, French fries
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So it's really an amazing, like, figuring out, okay, where do I find that peace without, having to turn to food or alcohol or drugs or pornography or whatever it was. And
Yeah.
when Tro and I had this discussion like 4 or 5 years ago, man, we got reamed by medical doctors saying, you guys are out in left field. You should have your license revoked for saying that, these coping mechanisms have anything to do with each other. And you go, well,
Mm.
explain it a different way for me.
Yeah. No, I mean, oh my gosh, dude, it's so true. And that's why, like, especially, with my work, we don't stop at the emotion of fear, right? Like we understand that, like, and that's why, like, obviously I'm a huge fan of, like, I don't know how familiar you are with like Dr. David Hawkins' work, and understanding like the levels of emotions essentially, and really his whole like maps of consciousness that he created and all that stuff. But it's not just about learning to navigate fear. That's generally the dominant emotion that people are usually experiencing when they connect with me. But you're right, it's actually learning how to navigate all of our kind of lower emotions, if you will. And I say lower emotions in the sense of, like, they're just like the heavier, more uncomfortable emotions we experience, right? Shame, guilt, anger, fear, right? Even desire, right? And even that's so big, even with diet, to understand just like the energy of desire, because that's what people get caught in addiction, is they essentially are in this endless loop of desire, right? Like I need to and a lot of times trying to escape certain other emotions, right? Like I feel bad about myself, and then food gives me that dopamine hit that then makes me feel a little, but then I feel worse, and so I eat more. And it's a very similar loop that people get caught in there.
Yeah, and it's hard because we're all, I think when like you're saying, you have to get down to the root cause. And one thing that's really like, I'm embarrassed to say, for the first 15 years of my practice or more, I didn't realize the effects of early childhood trauma. Then I, looked at
Mm.
the ACE study and I looked at all these things and how people get their nervous system wired up. And once your nervous system, it's kind of like the analogy I would use for people who don't understand this kind of stuff is that, say you have your car alarm set on a very, very sensitive setting. So anytime a car goes by or a motorcycle or the wind blows or it rains, your car alarm goes off and you freak out every single time. And other
Yeah.
people are like, oh yeah, that's just my alarm going off. It's a false alarm. I'm not going to worry about it. Right. So some people
Yeah.
just can't turn that alarm off in their brain and they get this panic sensation. So I've had patients who say, you know what, they have panic attacks for years and they're on Xanax or whatever they're on. And then all of a
Hmm.
sudden they realize, you know what, I've had all these panic attacks. I've been to the ER 14 times. It's never my heart. I'm not going to catastrophize. I'm just going to start taking a deep breath and relaxing my body and see what happens. And now they don't get panic attacks. They can
Yeah.
help themselves get out of it and talk to their brain instead of this disaster is coming, or once I don't sleep tonight, or with
Yeah.
guys erectile dysfunction. Once it happens once, they're
Sure.
like, oh my gosh, every time they're freaked out and it causes the
Sure.
problem to happen again, right?
Sure. Yeah. 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 Well, because again, as you know, with the sympathetic nervous system, right, that fight or flight, one of the things it does is suppress your sex drive, right? When you're just in that fight or flight. So how like one of the big things that I teach in like the gentleman, I'm spacing on the doctor's name right now, but the gentleman who really did the work on polyvagal theory and teaching about the nervous system. And I always, one of the things that drives me kind of crazy about a lot of people with medicine is a lot of times we're using language that people don't understand, and once someone doesn't understand something, they get overwhelmed and they kind of shut down and they just think this is something that I can't understand. So I'm always about like the idea of trying to use analogies and explain things in ways that make sense, that's very common language. So I always the analogy I always use for the nervous system is like an upside down stoplight. Right. And essentially, if you think about it, it's really where the energy goes in the body. And so if you think of a stoplight, you have green, yellow, red, right? Green, generally the energy is going to be moving into a person's face, right? And like in all the nerve endings in the person's face, and they're going to be socially engaged, right? So you're going to be paying attention to people's facial expressions. You're going to be talking, engaging, all this stuff. And when you're in green, you feel safe to socially engage with people, right? Yellow is when the energy is really going to be dominated in the chest, activating the heart, the extremities, the blood's going to be pumping into the arms. And that's really when you're in that fight or flight, right? Red is when you actually move into the gut and in the kind of the base of the stomach. And that's when you're in the immobilization response, right? You're in the freeze response, if you call it, right? And man, I'm not good. I'm just my name. Oh, Dr.
We'll
Peter
just make up
Levine,
something. It's all
right?
right.
Yeah,
People love
no,
him.
no, Dr. Peter Levine, who wrote the book Waking the Tiger, I believe. He talks about all his work healing trauma, right? Which is a big part of like integrating a lot of what he learned with somatic experiencing. And what he found was the reason someone gets traumatized is because they enter into that freeze response. And even when you talk to people who have been victims of significant assault or all that stuff, a lot of the language you'll hear is, hey, I froze. I don't know why I froze. And essentially that's the nervous system going into that last ditch effort, going into red. But the thing is when you go into red, all that energy is still in your body, right? So what Dr. Levine, figured out through somatic experiencing is actually allowing people to release the energy through the somatic experiencing, the bodily experiencing of a lot of that energy. And that's really a lot of the same principle that we teach with emotional release, the same thing Hawkins taught, the same thing that even some of the new agey people teach, like Michael Singer, and I really like his work. Eckhart Tolle, they talk about actually learning to be conscious and actually notice kind of what's going on in the body, right? A lot of mindfulness based teaching and stuff. And so want to make sure that I didn't mean new agey in like a bad way. It's just more kind of new age teaching, if you will. And I don't even know if that's the correct category, but it's just outside of more like medical teaching, right? And so I just wanted to clarify that because I actually enjoy both of their works very much. So when you understand the nervous system as a stoplight, one of the things that you begin to like when I work with anyone just that I do individually is always kind of like, okay, where am I noticing the energy in my body? right? Like, what am I even feeling in my body? Because so many people, they're so lost in their mind that they're really just out of tune with what's going on in the body. They're not really like conscious of it. So this is why when the energy really gets intense, that's why a lot of times they treat it as a problem, or they start thinking something's wrong with them. Again, immediately do, Xanax, alcohol, right? All the things that a lot of people use to kind of cope with suppressing the energy. And that's the big problem. And so where you guys are, where are you guys at? What
Well,
state?
I'm in San Diego right now, San Diego,
Okay,
Arizona, and then
so
yeah,
California, right? California,
yeah,
I mean, you see it all the time, right? I'm in California too. All the young people, right? Everyone's just like, oh, I feel anxious, so I smoke weed, right? Like marijuana is like like it's just this, and now it's just even not even in, it's in like, pen form, right? So you can smell and not even smell like anything, and they're just taking this THC oil in the nicotine pens, and it's
yeah.
just, but it's happening all the time. And then again, that's just acting as this suppression, the suppression of energy. And that's why teaching people the ability, and realizing that you actually have a very innate ability to feel and release emotion is, I think, one of the most empowering things you can teach people, and really understanding that your nervous system actually knows how to do this intuitively.
Yeah, I think it's so important as docs know, or maybe not a lot, but a lot of us see it and go, okay, if you're stressed and tense all the time, what does it do to your insulin level, your cortisol, all these things we say, don't eat cookies, but
Right.
that same person will be stressed out and fight with everyone all day. I'm not talking
Right.
about you, Tro. Tro's back, so he's here to defend himself. We've been talking about you. We've been psychoanalyzing you for the last
Oh
31
yeah,
Yeah.
minutes.
Repressed rage,
Yeah,
ego,
repressed rate. Yeah, we're talking about all that stuff, man.
definitely
Uh,
some ego, and the use of arrogance as a defense mechanism.
well,
Well,
maybe
hey,
we won't talk
I
about
wasn't
that,
trained
man.
in psychoanalysis, so I don't, yeah, I don't know a lot
Yeah,
about
he said
that,
Tro.
but
I go, can you explain Tro? He's like, dude, I haven't been to that much schooling yet. No one has. So I'm like, we're working on it, Tro. But in seriousness now, everyone, I love Tro. Don't send me hate letters. Tro and I are friends. We get along. We like each other. We support each other, right? So
100%.
despite our rough start, at the beginning we started this and guys tease each other a lot, so we would tease each other, and then everyone said Tro's being mean to Brian, then his
yeah,
people would be Brian's being mean to Tro's, like, we're joking,
yeah,
relax, we get it.
I
So
know.
anyways,
Yeah, yeah. Realizing on a podcast, you only get part of the conversation, right? Yeah, it's like you don't get the full dynamic, and
no,
so
we don't cut anything except if people ask. I mean, very rarely, Tro, have we cut anything out? We should have probably, but we didn't.
I don't
But
think so.
but I think it's important to see, because it's really important to hear it on a long term. Someone who, it may be someone I'd never really cared for. We interview on a long form, and I go, I get where you're coming from, right? We get it.
mhm,
So, but something like this is such a important thing, because people underplay that your body's listening to your gut, and your body, your brain is listening to these things, and they're sending signals back and forth all the time. Is it safe? Are you okay? So
yeah,
what's happening a lot that we see is people are in this chronic stress mode.
yeah,
So, I just did an interview in India, and they were asking, like, how are you so happy all the time? I'm like, if you knew me 6 years ago, I wasn't happy all the time. Right. I
hmm,
wasn't, because I was in a bad situation work wise. I was working 18-hour days, rushing around, didn't have, good balance in life and all that kind of stuff.
right,
So a lot of people are in that situation. They just don't know how to get out of it. So we have patients. What we see from our, tying in with what you're talking about, is we'll have someone, like, for me, I'll have a, a real estate agent with 3 kids who's stressed out constantly, and she's like weighing herself 4 times a day, right? She's like doing her macros, checking this, and like up, like not sleeping. And you go, I'm not having results. Like,
yeah,
okay, maybe we need to just take a breath and just not
right,
analyze every detail,
right,
right? And
right,
just go up to, and it happens too that we see. And I actually just confirmed this, Tro, talking to Jason Fung and Ben Bickman on my other podcast. They both said, yeah, people go on vacation, they eat terrible foods, and they lose weight because they're maybe walking and exercising more. They're looking at nature. They're not worried about, like, oh, I have a 2 o'clock. It's not that way. And so many people are stressed
No
all the time, but they just
pantry.
don't realize it, because it's like, oh, at 2 o'clock I have this meeting. Then at 1:30 I have to be here. And then I have to pick up the kids after work. And then I have to go make dinner. And they're in this constant state of not saying, you know what, let me just look at the beach. And they look at people
mm,
who look at the beach and go, these guys are lazy. Look at them. They're not. And these people are regrouping, right? Troy, like, we know in medicine, we could just work 24/7 and never see all the patients we have to see.
yeah. Well, and you bring up a really interesting point on that with like vacation, right? Because it challenges a lot of, ideas, right? Because I think, like we talked about, if you work at anything from just one perspective, you're missing a lot of the picture, right? Um, and this is why what what you begin to, at least how I understand stress, and same kind of thing with the idea of fear, right? When you begin to realize that environment is not cause, right? Is not there's not a causal effect of like stress of your environment and stress internally, because you can take people and put them in the exact same situations, and one person gets stressed, one person doesn't, one person has a fear reaction, one person doesn't. And so it's like, when, like, I use this example, and this is from Hawkins, but he talks about like a lot of people think like so if I took someone and I said, hey, we're going to get ready, we're going to go out for the evening, and they're playing their favorite song and it's bumping loud in their apartment or room at 8 p.m., and they're having just a great time getting ready. They go out, they come back, they're sleeping at 3 a.m., and that same song, same decimal point comes on. They're going to perceive that song stressfully now, because again, the reaction is this song shouldn't be happening, right? And the same song at the earlier state brought them into an amazing high, joy, excitement state. Same song, same decimal point, now is causing stress. And when you begin to realize, is actually like stress is not caused externally, it's caused by our perception and our resistance, right? Really, with what's happening, right? With things. So this is why when you begin to work from like anxiety, right? Anxiety, the one of the things that causes people so much stress about anxiety is they believe they shouldn't be feeling it, right? There's this belief of I shouldn't have panic, I shouldn't be anxious. So there's a natural resistance that they're bringing into the situation and then trying to make the feeling go away. And you said it earlier, Dr. Brian, that like you said, it's paradoxical, because when you actually teach someone that any amount of emotion in your system is actually normal and permissible, when you drop resistance to the emotion, the body naturally knows how to release it, right? Like the body naturally knows how to process fear. This is one of the things that we get to learn from animals, is that when an animal gets, like chased and it's running, right? And then it makes it to safety, what the animal does is it shakes, right? It has this intuitive instinct to shake and essentially discharge a lot of the excess energy in the body. And that's, it's very intuitive within people that when you're in a state of shame, guilt, anger, fear, right? All these stuff, that we actually have the ability to sit and be with that energy. And the less resistant we are to it, paradoxically, the quicker it passes. But one of the things that is so paradoxical about quote unquote anxiety treatment is that many doctors pathologize it, right? They sit there and tell you, yeah, oh, you have a disorder, you're sick, let's give you Xanax, let's smoke weed, right? Here's your medical cannabis. I'm not saying you guys prescribe medical cannabis, but you understand what I'm saying, that this the validation of the pathology that actually continues the resistance internally for people. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I just want to chime
Yeah.
in. I've one of the biggest harms, I think, about the mental health paradigm, the way we view mental health in modern medicine, is that we pathologize, a lot of systems that exist for good reason, right? There's
Yeah.
a good, anxiety in somebody who's in Ukraine right now fighting a war, right? That's somebody who sleeps with one eye open, double checks the locks,
Yeah.
gets out, moves the minute there's a sound, worries about things, right? They may live longer. Somebody who's out there, in a very hostile environment, anxiety may be a benefit, right? Um, depression, right? These depressive thoughts, right? They cause people to, go in solitude, or maybe seek out, ways to sort of feel a little bit better, right? There may be physiologic purposes for all of these things. I think the problem becomes when these things get extended or when they affect our quality of life. And then I agree with you 100%. We find people trying to make it some bad thing or something that they have to fight against, rather than maybe just, accept, process, and figure out the way, ways of managing it with the least impedance on quality of life. And that may or may not
Yeah.
be medications, And there may
Sure.
or may not be counseling. There may or may not be a lot of things, including
Sure.
all the things you listed, alcohol, cannabis. I don't, I'm not the one to decide what's the best for somebody to help manage their things. But 100% this idea that you brought up, man, I already know we're brothers, that the
Well,
unnecessary pathologizing of anxiety or OCD.
yeah. And like you said, a lot of times if your just body's thrown off because you're putting a bunch of, crummy fuel into it, right? That's gonna, essentially, it's gonna have impact, right? Like it's not uncommon for someone to go on a low carb or carnivore, but like, you hear people go carnivore, you hear people go low carb, right? Ketogenic diets. And you hear them say time and again about their mood shifting, right? The energy states that they're in, the access to energy that they have in general, just throughout. And it's like fueling and nourishing the body so it can do what it needs to do is obviously a huge part of this, right? And what most people that I see anyway, right? Just overloaded on coffee galore, which obviously I totally understand that as someone, father of a young child, uh, you know, drinking that morning cup of coffee at 6 a.m. is just kind of part of my day right now. And because that's when my day kicks off. But when you're talking 6, 7 cups a day, right? And then you're having to take that 2, 3 glasses of wine at night to wind down, and you multiply that over weeks, and then you throw in that starch to comfort you, all that stuff. It's like, of course, that's going to impact this, right?
And the sleep
And
deprivation, the
yeah,
negative, the community around you that doesn't support you,
sure.
in the light environment. I mean, like the lack of activity and exercise. If I want to make somebody's migraines, seizures, diabetes, anxiety, OCD, depression get worse, you know what I'll do? Give them alcohol, give them caffeine, take away their sleep, give them
Yeah,
terrible people in their life,
sure.
take away their ability to cope and process, make them inactive, isolated, and then give them a crappy diet,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and this is why it's so cool to have this conversation today, because it's like, I love the fact that you guys have your expertise and your background and understand this stuff on a level that I clearly don't know anything about. But it's always something that intuitively I've known is a part of this. And generally my advice to people is very generic, right? Hey, yeah, like cut out sugar, right? You minimize caffeine, right? Don't drink alcohol, right? Like that's generic, just advice that I'm giving from a nutritional standpoint. But it's I think I think with the big thing that I think misses from medicine in general, and this is just my belief, and I don't know, I'd be happy to hear you guys' thoughts on this, but this is, the body has a very innate healing principle to it. Like I don't consider myself a quote healer. You know what I mean? Because I know that the energy of the body is what heals, right? Like when I cut my finger, it has this innate ability just to heal. I don't do anything. You know what I mean? Like it knows what to do. And when you realize the body is moving towards regulation, right, and homeostasis on a consistent basis, and that it intuitively knows how to do this, it's like when you have all this energy coming to the surface, like anxiety, or let's say someone's feeling super angry or guilty or all this stuff, how I perceive and teach that is, well, your body is trying to release this stuff, dude. You know what I mean? And our resistance, it's like our body's pushing up this beach ball and we're like pushing it back down. And we're in this fight against something that's happening very natural. And that's why even with trauma, and you start to see like that, like with Dr. Levine's work, with the body shaking and the somatic experiencing and the releasing of energy around something, that it helps the whole brain recontextualize a situation. So like when you think about it, like even when you can use it, we use a different example of like anger. You can think about something that maybe caused you a ton of anger in a past state of previous time in your life. Someone wronged you, someone did something wrong, and a lot of times we've held on to that anger for a long time, right? And we think that like that person causes, we get around that person, it triggers up anger, all this stuff. But what you begin to realize is once you actually let go of the emotion of anger, it's like you can have that same thought in your mind and it does nothing to your nervous system, right? And the same kind of thing here with fear is with anxiety, what I found is like the central component of healing from anxiety is teaching someone the ability to actually sit in the face of the energy of fear and feel it through. And the body has this a very innate ability to release and regulate when you do that. And if you do that consistently and you let enough energy of fear out behind a situation, that's how, through exposure response prevention, you could take someone who used to get paralyzed by touching a doorknob and then watch them go walk through and open doors left and right and all this stuff. It's really fascinating when you see like how someone can overcome fear just by learning how to feel that emotion of it.
Yeah, and after you
And
go through it, then the fear becomes less and less every time you deal with that thing, right?
Right.
If you're
Right.
afraid of bungee jumping, once you do it once, like I did it once,
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm still not doing it again. But
Yeah.
that fear of heights and things like that, you go, this isn't as bad as that, right? You start putting things in perspective. And I think as we go through life challenges and you survive them, you can look back and say, well, I survived when whatever I got embezzled on or whatever happened. And
Yeah.
you start to have that the fear doesn't grip you. And I've seen that. As a matter of fact, just last night we were having this conversation. Someone was telling me about they were somewhere and they saw someone like hiking in the middle of the wilderness by themselves and they're wearing a huge mask and they're like, afraid of them and like they were kind of making fun of that person. I say, well, look, it's the fear response. They're afraid of getting
Mhm.
something,
Yeah.
but it really has to do with really being able to look at the risk and the benefits and all this. Because if we knew the stats on, car accidents, like people would be
Yeah.
freaked out to drive their cars, right? It's for you.
Sure.
Okay, what's the odds of you getting into an accident right now driving 2 miles? Pretty dang low, but it can
Hmm.
happen. But
Yeah.
some people are worried every day in California. We live in California. Troy, we got some West Coast influence here now.
Yeah.
But if I worry every day about an earthquake, what the heck can I do about it other than saying, okay, let me put some food or water or health code in my, I could say that here, Troy, health code in my pantry, and I can make that if things get really bad, right?
very shelf stable.
Yeah.
I have no conflicts with that statement, right? It's very shelf stable. Um, Matt, I mean, both of you guys are just saying so much right, Brian. I didn't mean to interrupt you, so go ahead, Brian.
No, no, no. That's true. I was just kind
Yeah.
of making that point is that so many people walk around in fear all the time. And that fear, Jason Fung and I talked about it too, is like if you're in the middle of a massage, no one says, you know what, stop this massage or something you really love to do, or like going for a hike or whatever you enjoy, and say, I got to get something to eat right now. Right. But if you're in a really tense argument, like I need a cookie, right? So
Yeah.
it's just that our way of dealing with our emotions and like Matt's saying, coming to terms saying, yeah, I am upset and here's why. And sometimes we're just mad all the time. We don't know why. And that's a scary thing because you can't put your finger on it. Like at my old job, it was like, why are you on edge? And I had to think like, why am I? Well, because they didn't bring my patient back on time. I know I'm going to be working till 9 o'clock tonight. And so you could start understanding why you're feeling that way and deal with it. And go, okay, it is what it
Yeah.
is.
And
Being
and
mad
and
about is
the,
not going to help you.
and the cumulative pressure though of a situation like that, day in, day out, week in, week out, right? Like if you bury that enough, like eventually your tank is just full, right? Like if you saw your nervous system as this big like emotional tank and you're just it's filled to the brim. When you see someone who's easily triggered or like who tends to just very easily get dysregulated, a lot of times it's not anything about that person that's like it's not like that's a super sensitive person or anything like that necessarily. It's like a lot of times their emotional tank is just so full that like it's just kind of like everything is that straw that broke the camel's back, right? And so if you saw it like that, and that's why um and I've always been so interested in the connection between emotion and disease, right? And first starting with the book when the body says no by Dr. Gabor Mate, right? Just a fascinating read where he was this terminally ill uh clinic that he oversaw as the main doctor, and he started just noticing these emotional patterns with certain diseases coming in, and that's why I think, and obviously I'm not saying it's like the only cause, but obviously there's a connection here, right? Like there's obviously multiple things, and I think that's a big thing that gets left out in modern medicine, right? Or Western medicine specifically is the emotional component of people, right? Because it's like if someone's sitting there and they're all these things are dysregulated, and it's just like, okay, how can we medicate each symptom? It's like, okay, well, no, hold on, like let's look environmentally for a second, like what's going on in their life, what's their emotional state like, what's the dominant emotion they're living in, and what's their diet like, what's their sleep like, what's, what are they doing to care for themselves? Because it's like, man, it's like one big pressure cooker eventually, right? And that's where I think having an open mind to start to like integrate a lot of things into health is just so important, because we get trained in a certain aspect and then go so one track on it that we end up like it ends up not working together with other people,
Yeah, it's a crazy thing when you say that, because while you're talking, I'm reflecting and I'm thinking about, I've done a lot of medical mission trips to Vietnam, El Salvador,
Sure.
Guatemala, Central America, Mexico. And guess what? We'll have my translator who doesn't know anything about medicine. We'll be talking to someone, and so a lady will come in and say, "Oh, I'm having headaches, neck pain, stomach ache, and back pain, and all these things." And by the end, I'll go, "What do you think it is? Stress. What's happening in life? Oh, my husband left me. I have 3 kids. I'm up all night and I'm worried about life, and I can't pay my bills." That kind of stuff. And you see
Yeah.
the physical manifestation of these things. Just so the standard doctors in America, unfortunately, go, "Oh, you have heartburn, headaches, back pain. Okay, here's some ibuprofen, here's some stomach medicine, here's
Right.
something for your anxiety, here's something to help you sleep." Instead of saying, "What's going on?" And so
Yeah.
many of our patients you'll see these constellation of symptoms and go, "How's life treating you?" And they'll just break down in tears and crying, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh
so
my
they
gosh,
have
dude.
nowhere to
Yeah.
go to talk
Because
to.
it's like they finally have that opportunity to like let that pressure out,
Mhm.
And can I ask you both just some open questions from like my own information to gather from this? So like, what's your perspective on, you know, or I guess what was your training on when it came to treating anxiety and OCD? Like someone comes to you, and how would you work at that from like if you were going to prescribe anything, and then from a diet perspective?
Oh, you don't want to know the right answer. You don't. So how we were trained or what we've learned?
No, like so for what you were trained, what you do now, right? Because it was an interesting study that just came out last year that in the NIH released, and I can send you guys over the article after this, but it was all on the SSRIs, right?
Oh,
And how the SSRIs essentially, it showed that through testing the SSRIs, like certain people had an increase of serotonin, decrease of serotonin. And even then, with an increase, they might have gotten worse. With a decrease, they might have felt better. And the main argument of the whole article was SSRIs, the effectiveness was primarily placebo. And
oh,
I was like,
let's talk
dude,
about
it's
this.
like, yeah, no,
Let's
because this
let's
is a
let's
question I
talk
get all
about
the
it.
time. Yeah, let's do it.
Brian, can I start this off because
Oh, certainly, sure,
I
certainly.
I wanted to get Dr. Hughes on. Dr. Hughes, if I have that name right, he was the director of Harvard's the School of Placebo Studies, and he wrote a book called The Emperor's New Drugs. I don't know if you've
Mm,
ever seen that or
no,
heard about it, but you have to read
I'll
it.
check it out. Yeah.
It he what he did
Are
was
you
he
sure he wrote it if he's from Harvard?
yeah. So he interesting guy, and he was looking to do a meta-analysis on the effectiveness of SSRIs in depression, and he found that there was a lot of registered clinical trials that had never resulted. So the pharmaceutical companies had never published them; it was never published anywhere. And he used the Freedom of Information Act to basically foil the FDA and get the negative trial data that was submitted by these companies for SSRIs. And he ran a meta-analysis, and it showed that SSRIs for the treatment of mild to moderate depression had very little efficacy. In
Mm,
fact, no different than placebo, using all of the negative trial data that was hidden.
mm,
The FDA responded with its own meta-analysis, which showed it was nominally efficacious. Now, they didn't look at OCD and anxiety, which seems to have a better efficacy. The SSRIs seem to be slightly more effective for OCD
mm,
and anxiety. I don't think I've seen that data, but what's happened since then, and this was about 10 years ago, we have data showing the impact of diet on mental health outcomes. We have, meta-analyses looking at exercise on anxiety and OCD. We know the effects of sleep deprivation on mental health more concretely.
yeah.
So if you take a step back, where previously when I trained and when Brian, trained in the days of Osler, what we well we were taught, uh, anxiety and panic and OCD is SSRIs first and foremost. And
Because the
very,
theory is it's caused by a chemical imbalance. Like the
yeah,
chemical imbalance is
yeah.
cause.
And yeah, which is well, I think it was the theory based on form over reliance on pharma, right? So that's what we were taught, and I think people who have some experience with psychiatry would have said there may have been some nuance, but every primary care doc who's seeing OCD and anxiety would have started with an SSRI. It's
Right.
one of the most widely prescribed classes. And since then, since like taking the shroud of crap off of us, the insurance-based AMA dogma, authoritative sort of thing that Brian and I have tried to escape, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I think we've become a lot smarter, and a lot of people are getting smarter. Even the Harvard people, like Chris Palmer, are now writing books on brain energy, talking about there's more to psychiatry than a chemical imbalance. It has
Yeah.
to do with the mitochondria. It has to do with everything. All of lifestyle impacts this, and I mean that makes so much more sense than this BS chemical.
Well, yeah. Because then the whole argument I always had against it is like I've seen people take SSRIs, do behave like I've never seen a client have extreme success just taking SSRIs. Like that's their only intervention, right? Like I've seen people take SSRIs, integrate behavioral intervention, right? Exposure response prevention, and seen effective results, but I've also seen it without it, right? And people
I've
not
seen
take
it.
it.
I've seen it. I've seen
Yeah,
it
it's
I have seen it. I'll be honest with you. But who knows if it was time? Who knows if it was a
Right.
drug? Who
yeah, it was
knows if it
placebo,
was,
what it was. Yeah, that's the hard thing because for instance, I've used Lexapro historically for people who are really anxious and stressed, and sometimes that just in a couple days ago, I can breathe again. I can start, and then maybe they
well,
can counsel better than being on
well, a
this.
couple days is
Well, and
yeah.
that's always
No,
been,
with anxiety, I've seen it in a couple
yeah,
days. Like it could be placebo, possibly, but I don't care if my patient gets better. I'll take the placebo if it
right.
doesn't cause them a
Yeah.
harm, right?
Well, and
But
I
yeah,
think
it's yeah,
yeah, like what you're saying 100% is I've seen it take symptom reduction for sure. I've seen symptoms reduce, right?
yeah, but not it's not going to
But
resolve that.
but I've never seen someone like start taking it and I just have them symptom free, right? Where they're just
You
like,
know
I
what
just
happens?
don't,
They
yeah.
gain weight because they no longer recognize stress-induced anxiety, right? And they
Mm,
they no longer recognize how it impacts. They don't feel the anxiety now because they're numb to it, and then they gain weight. I
yeah.
firmly believe the weight gain associated with SSRIs is because it takes the symptoms away. You can no longer self-perceive that anxiety. And what does anxiety do to hunger? It robs you of the self-perception of hunger, but you eat more.
Mm,
That
yeah.
has been reliably shown in in feeding studies where they've literally put people in front of a buffet, they give them stress cues, and they eat more in a stress cue, right, than you get with a hunger cue. And
Yeah.
they have no self-perception of hunger. And if you take the self-perception of anxiety and stress away with an SSRI, what happens with all SSRIs? You gain weight,
Mm,
gain weight.
yeah.
Well, what what's funny is I could tell you one anecdote for you guys, and maybe you have similar stories. One of my guys, he is. Did you ever see the movie What About Bob? Like
Hmm.
super hypochondriac, super anxious, super stressed all the time. And I've been trying to help him go, look, your MRI is normal. Anyways, it was a battle. And this guy, I just saw him recently, and I was thinking of all the people going through what we went through the last 3 years. This guy would be a basket case. He's like, my OCD is cured. I'm like, how can
Mm,
that be? He goes, I looked around at all these people. And I go, how can they be so fearful? He goes, I did the research and looked at the numbers. He goes, I realized I lived my whole life in stress and fear and all this stuff. He goes, I'm not living like that. He just came to this conclusion and
yeah.
he never calls me with health problems anymore. I mean, he was calling me like
Yeah.
consistently. And
Like
you go,
health
wow.
anxiety. Yeah.
But he looked at it and he goes, anxiety didn't help these people. And like we're washing my hands 30 times a day. It's like unreasonable. And so he started
Yeah.
realizing that. And
Anxiety worsened it, Brian, worsened
Yeah.
it. People with
Right.
anxiety disorder were much more likely to die, even more than high blood sugar. It was the
exactly.
number one most strongest predictor of death. Second was hyperglycemia.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
what's interesting, and this is like the case Hawkins makes in his work is like it's interesting because a lot of times the justification for continuing the patterns of anxiety, right, and OCD is that it helped keep me alive, it kept me safe, right? That's the main justification for people is like, well, I wash my hands and they have that shift from feeling anxious to relief. So they really believe that what they're doing is keeping them safe. And he's like, the paradox of fear is that the amazing thing is that we've stayed alive in spite of fear. Because as we know, when we're in a state of fear, it blocks our ability to think rationally. This is why in COVID, you saw people fighting over toilet paper in the parking lot. It's like, and they would tell you probably that they're being rational. They're like, like this makes sense. I need toilet, because it's, and this is, as someone who's lived in this, I really try to explain this to people that like when you're in that sympathetic state or the sympathetic nervous system, it's really like you have these goggles over your eyes and you are seeing the world in a very distorted way, but it looks real to you. Like I've had people look and be like, Matt, there's germs on the door. I can see them, right? Or, hey, Matt, like, there's lead from the plane that just came over my house and now it's in the water, or and this and I mean, I've had really extreme cases where like we don't need to disclose that, I guess, but it's a thing where when fear really takes over someone's life, it can be incredibly debilitating. And I think that's why the grand paradigm, and this is why my program is primarily group based, and I actually mandate anyone that come through my program be in group, because one of the biggest things about group does is it finally gives you an opportunity to see fear objectively, because you get to talk to someone else who has a fear that you don't have, and you get to be like, that doesn't even make sense to worry about it. And then they're looking at you and being like, that doesn't make sense to worry about that. And you actually get to challenge the idea, like, am I thinking, is this helping me? Is this actually rational to live like this? Right? Because when you talk one-on-one to someone, you never get that objective experience, like you're saying. And that's what it's interesting. But most of my clients, well, you would think during COVID would have really, most of my clients, I think you got the opportunity to see it, and the COVID fear didn't take over, for most people. It was usually a lot of people who didn't wrestle with anxiety that
That's
the COVID
remarkable.
fear.
That's exactly what I've seen in my practice too, is that
Yeah.
the it's the same people. Like we saw what doctors, one of Tro's favorite doctors who has been wrong on every front that he's ever been on, that I think, as far as I can see. Anyways, this guy was talking about like crazy. You remember, Joey? Like he's had a ventilator system in every one of his rooms, and he had like tubes that were going under the ground. He wouldn't let his wife go outside, and was like unbelievable. It's like, do you know the odds, right? Do you know the odds, like, to lock your entire family up? What kind of outcome will that be? And so the thing is, though, that same guy would tweet pictures of himself wearing a mask on a train where he's asymptomatic and he's saying, look, I'm protecting the people around me. I'm saving lives right now. And you're like, he sees it that you're the crazy one, because you're the one saying, hey, look, my odds are 99.9x chance of survival if I get this thing. And I'm going to do everything I can, but I'm not going to be like locking myself under my bed for 3 years.
Yeah. Well, and because this is what it is, right? Like when you're in the energy of fear, it's same thing with health anxiety, with scrupulosity, with intrusive thoughts. You either have one of two options. It's either I have to admit that I'm in the energy of fear and that this is really the issue, or I project it outside of me to protect myself from admitting that I'm wrong. Right? I have to put it outside of myself. Right? You're like, Matt's the cause. You guys are not like, because again, the last thing we ever want to be from an ego perspective is wrong. Right? It just is. Like no one wants to say I was wrong. Right? That's a huge hit to the ego, and especially when you have a practice and license and all this other and training. A lot of times, like like that, you stack that with it, and that's why it was so strange. Like I remember putting a podcast out April 2020 where I was watching people in the store. And I think just having had the experience of being so lost in fear early on in my life for many years, seeing like, eventually I kind of got to this point where I was like, it's actually worse for my worst fear to happen than for me to live in fear. Like that was my big turning point on my journey, where I was just like, it would be better if my worst fear came true than for me to keep living in fear of it. Right? Like that, the tipping point happened for me. And when I was watching people fight in stores and do all this stuff, I was just like, or like, I watched this guy, like grown man, check like a woman to grab some vegetables in the store in front of me. And I'm like, you guys know, like the pandemic here is fear, dude. Fear is contagious. And the thing is, it's invisible. It's an energy that just takes over. And when you don't even know you're consumed by it because you really believe you're being logical. And that's the hardest part about fear is even convincing someone that they're lost in fear. You know, it
Yeah, or
really is.
someone who's stressed to say you're stressed out. You can observe
Normal.
their rapid breathing and they're worried about everything, and in pressured speech, and you go, maybe you're stressed out. No, I'm not stressed
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
I'm not stressed at all. My
Right.
neighbor's stressed, but not me.
Yeah, that's the harm of stoicism, right? So I believe I've been stoic my whole life, right? Or at least I've tried to be. And I've always, really looked up to stoicism. But the one thing stoicism takes from you, and the most like amazing, people that I met are incredibly stoic, and yet similarly lack the ability to understand their emotional state.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Because if you admit any dysregulation, you're almost going against the philosophy of being balanced and stoic, right? Right. I mean, am I understanding that correctly or no? Am I saying that right or no?
I think we may be like, we may be taking it to the extremes of it, but yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, if you're stoic, you just deal with it.
Well, and
Yeah.
I think there's a difference between handling something. So there's definitely a difference between I need to be completely regulated and handle this versus I can experience an emotional dysregulation and still react appropriately. Right? Like I can have an immense fear happen, be with that fear and still behave in a stoic alignment versus I don't have that emotion. Here it is. Right? You know what I mean? Like there's that unacknowledgement of the emotion.
But you're right in that too, and is that fear takes away critical thinking because you're just like reacting and you don't think like, oh, maybe I shouldn't jump out of this building just because someone burned toast in the toaster on the third floor. Like I should jump off the 18th floor probably. Right.
Yeah.
But some people are like, oh my gosh, the flame's on burning, I'm jumping. It's like, well, think about it and assess a little bit. And that's kind of our job, Tro, is to say, okay, look, here's the risk, here's the benefit, right? I know it's out of vogue right now in medicine to do informed consent, but I still strongly believe in that. Informed consent and patient autonomy. And all of a sudden they go, there's an emergency. Forget all that stuff that we know. It's like, wait a minute. We know this stuff in medical science. Like people forgot all about that. And so, I saw fear being such a horrific driver for people making bad decisions. Because if I say, hey, Matt, I just diagnosed you with cancer, but by the way, I have a cure. You have 100% mortality rate, but I have a cure for $50,000 and I can save you. Like people go, okay, here you go. And I'll go, hey, Brian, what's the risk of this working? Like, I mean, because you're desperate.
Right. Right. And I think, and fear puts you in that desperate mode. Well, and circling back to kind of what we we're talking about with SSRI. So like, how do you guys go about this from I mean, because number one, I mean, I think the thing is everyone's susceptible to fear to a certain degree. And you guys being obviously very highly intelligent, highly rational people which is kind of a prerequisite for being doctors in the first place, I think. At least one would assume, right? I'm sure there's exceptions to that rule. And so, but, I mean, just listening to you guys and even you guys, your willingness to branch against mainstream thought, I mean, like that takes an aspect of like looking at things in a different way than everyone else is and getting out of the emotion of things, right? So when someone's coming to you and they're presenting, let's say, panic attacks, hey, I'm having racing thoughts, hey, I'm having a hard time sleeping. When you work at it from a nutrition, body, and diet standpoint, like what is your primary protocol?
Well, for me, it's like, look, we talk about these things. I'll tell you, one of my heroes, Ben Bickman, everyone knows that, but he's from BYU, and he goes, look, and I attribute him with changing my life a lot, and him and Tro, believe it or not, but 5 things, right? He goes, Brian, there's 5 things. I go, look, Ben, if I want to live a long life, what do I got to do? He goes, 5 things. Number 1, don't work yourself to death and be stressed out all the time. Number 2, get enough sleep. I was like, I think your rules suck, Ben. I'm 0 for 2 so far. He goes, you're a doctor, and that's why you guys died before everyone else, right? Number 3, eat real food. Don't eat processed food, eat real food. Next, don't smoke or drink to excess. Next, exercise regularly. So I'll talk to people every day, and they'll go, oh, I'm good at this, but not at this, and not that. And we go, okay, let's work on this and this then. Okay. Mm-hmm. You're already eating low carb. You're already doing the right stuff nutritionally, but you're fighting with your husband every day. Let's work on that part of it. So there's so much of that we can do, and that helps people. When you start getting your life, these things, like all of us have something out of order in our lives generally. And you go, okay, how do I fix that problem? For me, it was like saying, okay, let me go on a different career path. Let me cut down my stress levels, right? Let me go and do stuff I enjoy a little bit more and not be like when we were talking about vacation before. If I was going out, as a matter of fact, Tro, I don't know if you remember this. We were in Boca Raton for a conference. When I got back to my office from that, it was like a crap show for a month. And I'm talking to Tro in Boca, and he's like, Brian, you got to stop what you're doing. He goes, I'm going on a cruise with my wife after this conference. I'm like, what? You're taking another week off? He goes, I just call my patients from the boat. I do what I got to do. And it's like,
Yeah.
I'm not like running to the hospital all night doing all this crazy stuff. But part of it saying, okay, let me simplify a little bit. And I can tell you that was like a massive life change for me. It's like, I'm not really eager to take over the world to make $1 million. It was going to cost me time with my wife and kids and having coffee with my wife this morning. Right. So,
Yeah.
it's those kind of things when you start to really assess. So that's why I say is like, look, if we can get your stress, getting some boundaries down, it's going to make it so much easier. Because the people who fail, Tro and I will say this over, we've been saying this from day one. Lack of family support and stress are the two biggest killer of any lifestyle change. There's no question about it. I mean, we have enough data and knowledge, and you talk to anyone, you were doing so great. What happened? My husband left me. What do? You turn to food because you're stressed and depressed and anxious. And then you say, screw it, I'll get back next year after the holidays, after the Super Bowl. And so those things we start seeing and you go, okay, how do we manage some of these things? Because again, if you're at a resort and you're relaxing and you're out for a hike or getting a massage, you don't say, I need to eat cookies right now. You go, I don't need a cookie. I'm relaxed. So many people are escaping their horrible life. They hate their boss. They're stressed all day at work. And, for me on Sunday nights, it'll be like, oh no, I got to go back tomorrow. And there's dysfunction and people are going to argue and I have to deal with this. So when you don't have to deal with that, you go, oh, this is nice. Right.
Yeah.
We just had our Christmas party with my office and like, everyone loves each other and everyone gets along. I'm like, we enjoy each other and we genuinely want the best for each other and everything. And you go, this is great to be around.
Well, it's
the Christmas party, everyone would fight and get drunk and it would be a disaster when everyone's on edge all the time, and there's like 2 weeks ago you said this. So it's like, it's Christmas, relax,
Yeah.
So it's it's being in this dysfunctional state all the time is very stressful.
Yeah.
Or trying to keep up with the Jones or saying I have to have a better car than you or my house has to be bigger and all this stuff,
Well, and all of that. I mean, because if you really just break down what everyone's doing, like I love your simplicity because I tend to always try to move to simplicity and explanation and solution. And that's kind of why I teach the AAA response, right? Like that's like, and we can talk about that in a little bit if you guys want. Just so your audience can kind of get the basic concept of handling internal dialogue, internal emotions, all that stuff. But really, when it comes back down to people, the only reason most people are doing whatever they're doing is they're attempting to feel better, right? And what that usually means is they're in an energy state that they don't want to be in, and they're trying to improve that, right? And a lot of times people, the worst way that people go about that, like there is an element of environment that's important, but a lot of people just focus on environment. So they're like, I need to make this much money. I'll be happy when I make this much money. I'll be happy when I'm this weight. When paradoxically, if you're not happy until you're at a certain weight, you're going to cause so much stress trying to get there that you're never going to get there usually, right? It becomes like paradoxical, right? And so much of what drives people again is that fear, right? That anger, the shame, the guilt, and learning how to navigate those experiences. I mean, I just think is at the center of so much of people's well-being because so much of what they're doing usually is trying to do something in their environment to mask those experiences. And obviously, like I totally agree because I worked Department of Social Services in Orange County for 4 years, right? 2 as an intern, and I mean, 100% the most stressful environment I've ever been in. And every single person in that building was wildly unhealthy. I probably gained like 30 pounds in 2 years. And I didn't even feel like I was changing my diet that much. It was just the accumulation of like the pressure and the energy of the environment. So obviously energy in an environment is a huge thing, I think, that needs to be taken into consideration. But a lot of times we justify staying in something that's completely toxic because we think of like, these long-term things that totally don't even make sense. And so that's why no, I love what you're saying on that one, but anyways, I just wanted to kind of express that, like, and just kind of understand your basic points. But Dr. Tro, did you have like simple things that you work with your clients when it comes to like regulating their system and all that?
No, I don't know. I don't know if we have time today to go through all that. I've been regulating this internal system for a long time, so I got a lot of tools. But I also like turning to help. You know, we have a mental health counselor now who works with our practice, and we're trying to connect with mental health counselors just like you, so we can create a network of really positive people to help people with anxiety and depression, and without, not necessarily without medications, but, is there anything else we can do? Is there anything more we can do to help people? So, I think it's I'd love to talk for hours about this. Maybe we got to bring you back for another podcast and we can talk more about it.
Yeah.
But
I want to hear about
it's
AAA though before we
yeah, yeah. Let's hear about
get
AAA.
sidetracked.
Yeah. So I mean, coming back to the central point of like the nervous system, right? And what happens with people that are experiencing OCD and anxiety is they're getting caught in a loop, right? And that loop can latch onto anything: sleep anxiety, health anxiety, right? Driving anxiety, intrusive thoughts, panic attacks, panic disorder, right? So we really look at the stress response like a big spectrum of an experience, right? It's not like we don't categorize general anxiety, social anxiety, and OCD and as all these different things, right? It's like people with OCD have panic attacks. People with panic attacks have social anxiety. They become agoraphobic, right? It's like we really see it as like a spectrum of an experience. So the idea is anytime you're doing a behavior that's validating the thought or the threat, right? You're conditioning yourself to teach yourself that that's dangerous. And number one, the behavior kept me, and number two, that the behavior kept me safe. So when you understand the loop of thought, feeling, behavior, relief, and those four components really tie in to keep someone in an energetic state that essentially keeps the sympathetic nervous system going, you realize it becomes self-perpetuating because when you get into sympathetic, you become hyper aware of threat. So you start to see threat everywhere, right? So the whole idea of the AAA response comes back down to, okay, we understand that the problem is a loop, right? And the way we break the loop, the only thing we actually have control over is our behaviors, right? It's the only aspect we have control over. Thought will happen automatically. Feelings can come up whenever they come up. So we stop trying to solve the thought and feeling problem, and we really centralize our focus on behaviors. So telling someone though not to do a behavior is not an effective intervention, because if that was true, people that wrestle with alcoholism, we would just say, hey, just don't drink, right? I mean, like if that was an effective intervention, it would work, and it doesn't. So the whole idea of the AAA response was to implement a solution that indirectly prevents people from engaging in behaviors. Now, the main thing that keeps most people stuck that I see is most people engage in what I would call mental compulsions or mental safety behaviors. And this is all the rumination, the analyzing, the thought blocking, the thought replacement, the thought suppression, the silent praying, the silent counting, the mental distracting. This is what most people do. So for instance, and like I was saying, the basic intervention in really breaking the wheel is ERP, or exposure response prevention. Now, and I know I'm doing like a 90-second spiel on this, but going back to the doorknob example, the whole idea of the treatment intervention would be someone who's afraid of doorknobs. We're going to touch the doorknob, and which is the exposure, and we're going to prevent you from responding so they don't wash. And we're teaching your nervous system that this doorknob's actually not actually dangerous, right? We're letting the nervous system activate, letting it regulate without the wash, and then they learn, okay, well, I didn't die from touching that doorknob. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's the exposure response prevention intervention. The issue is most people are doing all these mental behaviors, so they're not actually doing ERP, right? So they touch a doorknob and they may not wash, but they'll sit and ruminate about it. They'll sit and analyze, which is still validating the threat. So the AAA response is really designed to be a 3-step process to make sure someone's doing the correct thing with their thoughts, the correct things with their feelings, and the correct things behaviorally. And if I just summarize it quickly, the first step is really to agree and disengage with the mind and realize, and this is really teaching people this idea of consciousness and understanding the idea of the mind being something that you're aware of, right? So when the mind is chatting and all these thoughts are happening, actually getting the person to understand this idea of a subject-object relationship with their mind in ways of where, like, if I'm holding up this little case here, I'm aware of this case, so I can't be the case, right? Because I'm aware of something, I can't be that thing. And so when they're like, oh, my mind is saying all this stuff, one of the questions that I like to ask is like, well, how do you know that? Well, because I hear it, I'm aware of it. Okay, right. So when I ask people, like, if I turned off your mind, like, would you stop existing? It's like, no, your mind would just be quiet and you would just be aware of the present moment, right? And so the mind is the first thing that most people get caught in. And the first thing we have to teach people is the ability to disengage, meaning not get involved with, but allow the mind to do whatever it's doing and to be able to actually place your awareness somewhere, right? Because so many people are so lost in their mind, they don't even know they're lost in their mind. Right. And that's the first real jump with the AAA response, because we don't want people engaging in a bunch of the mental behaviors. The second is really learning how to allow emotions in the body. And specifically when it comes to fear, the first thing that we have to be able to do is drop resistance to the emotion before we can allow it. And so it's really about normalizing the idea of, hey, I have this energy going on in my body, and walking through a series of steps to actually allow that energy to be there, right? To give to communicate that it's safe to feel this, right? And then the next thing is we move into, like, the third step would be attack. And the whole idea of attack is to actually move into a way where we're moving in opposition to the fear. So this, a lot of times it involves doing the opposite of whatever the fear is telling you to do. Right. So if the fear is like, hey, you should go wash. Hey, I'm not going to wash. Hey, you should avoid that diner. We're actually going to go right to the diner. And we're actually activating more of the fight mechanism, if you will, and actually moving against the fear. So by integrating that consistently, right, we're preventing the behaviors, which is preventing the wheel from forming, which is actually allowing the nervous system to return to homeostasis. Does that make sense what I'm saying there?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Listen, I gotta get you back on, Matt. You know what? We also gotta get you to our small group. You know, our group would definitely benefit to just hear from you, and you know, we have a group that meets weekly. I
Yeah.
know Brian's got a
Oh,
group that meet
no,
weekly. We got about 50, you know, sometimes anywhere from
well,
10 to 50 people. We
Well,
gotta
I
get
have
you
so
there.
much that I want to learn from you, to be honest. And so, like, from my viewership and my listenership, like, what resources can I send them to?
We'll help you with all that.
Okay.
Absolutely. The
Okay.
Dr. Tro
Yeah.
app, Low Carb MD podcast, you know,
Dr. Tro
uh,
app, look our
Life's
yeah,
podcast.
Best
Okay.
Medicine
you
podcast. Oh,
Yeah.
know,
that's a really good one, I hear.
Life's Best Medicine podcast. Yeah,
Yeah.
you
No,
know,
no.
and
Well, because I think that there's such a bridge here that can be so beneficial. It's like, I mean, because
you know what?
yeah.
The other big one, Metabolic Mind. If you're, you know, Metabolic Mind is a great resource for people interested in the space. Chris Palmer's Metabolic Psychiatry Focus, Shubhani Sethi, you know, Bipolar Cast is another one.
Georgia
Uh,
Eid, she has a new
Georgia
book coming
Ede.
out.
Yeah,
There's so many good
exactly.
people that are in this space. So it's amazing that so many people don't know of each other and you're doing the same type of work and start, to start understanding from a counseling standpoint from. So many of my patients could benefit from dealing with you too and learning from you. And so
No, yeah.
working together, you're right. It's the synergy of that saying, hey, look, let's work on the nutrition part, the stress part, the sleep part, because here on this podcast, initially we could just talk about low carb diet. That's it.
Hmm.
Exercise, no, you don't need a diet. No, you don't have to worry about stress. You don't have to worry. But it's so obvious that when you see it and you see the big picture and you see who fails and who succeeds, you go, okay, all these are factors. So it's so amazing when you say, oh, how do I deal with this fear I'm feeling or stress or anger or whatever? It's okay to feel that. Like how do we
Yeah.
respond to it? It's like you're saying,
Well, oh my gosh. And I think
you know,
that's just like, you just summarized it so well. It's just like, number one, realize stress is your resistance to your environment, right? Like that is the cause of stress, is your resistance to the environment, not the environment itself. Secondly, that you're allowed to feel whatever is going on. Like that, giving yourself that internal permission to say, I'm allowed to feel this is like that drops all resistance right there, right? And that's like when you summarize it. So like, I mean, you said it really well there. It's like it it's simpler than people make it, right? It's like giving yourself that space to say, you know what? I do feel angry right now, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that I need to go lash out and go road rage. It just means I need to sit with this energy and let it be here for a little bit. I do feel afraid right now. I do feel shame right now. Like these acknowledgments and allowing of certain feelings in the body is generally what people are trying to escape all the time as it is.
I
You
needed
know,
you
and
So
last
you should
week,
be
man.
writing this down, man.
I
You're not
wrote
writing
it
this
all
down?
down. Yeah, listen, I maybe his first, doctor patient. Maybe he's got other doctors who are patients. Listen,
Um,
Matt, sorry,
yeah,
Brian, I didn't mean to cut you
no,
off.
I was going to ask Matt how people can track him down, how they get to
Yeah,
his podcast, and if they
yeah,
want to
we'll put
reach
it
out to
all
you
in the
for a
show
consult.
notes.
yeah. No, so the Restored Minds is my website, restoredminds.com. The podcast is the OCD and Anxiety Show on all major platforms, and then YouTube as well. And then I just released my book, From Stuck to Unstuck, which can be on our site and on Amazon. And so we have an e version, right? All of that stuff. So I mean that would be the first like kind of initial places to kind of connect. And but yeah, I mean I'm happy to again send you guys any resource I can that would benefit you, your obviously people that you work with, all that stuff. Because I very much believe, I mean, the thing is you guys are going to be the people that most people go to first. You know what I mean? Like that with mental health, that's usually the last thing people want to even consider because there's such a stigma to it, right?
Especially guys.
And yo, my gosh, especially guys, right? Because it's weak, quote unquote. And just that normalization, I think is so important, like normalizing very normal experiences. And it's so and because that was my problem, right? I stayed in isolation and silence and I suffered for a long time because I was so embarrassed about what I was going through, and that's why my goal was always like, okay, I'm just gonna try to just put it as much as I can out there and just not, and whatever, right? You know what I mean? On the podcast and stuff, and disclose my own story and not try to talk about this from this theoretical perspective, like really integrate like personal story, and realize like I'm a person and I'm flawed, right? I have emotions, yeah, I have thoughts, right? Like, and that's okay, and yeah, no, I just I'm so fascinated to just like to get a deeper discussion with you guys because I think I would love to be able to integrate all the stuff you guys do into people that I work with as well. And so it'd be really cool to connect. So, and I feel
Amen.
very, very grateful that you had me on today, by the way. I just wanted to express that.
You can thank our mutual patients because they put me onto you. So,
Yeah.
guys, check out the show notes. Matt, thank you so much for coming. Brian,
Thanks, guys.
always
I'm
a
gonna check.
pleasure.
Send me Matt's contact stuff, Tro,
Happy
so I
to do
can
it.
track him down, get him
Yeah.
on Life's Best Medicine, and talk about this stuff because I think it's so critical. This is mental health is so critical. Watch what's coming, everyone. I'm telling you right now, mental health crisis is it's not just on the doorstep, it's here, and we're seeing it in doctors and nurses and healthcare workers and across the board, and young kids. I'm talking to them and hearing their fears, and it's devastating. If you want to talk about hell, it's mental illness and living in fear and depression and anxiety all the time. Like
Yeah.
you could have a sore knee and it doesn't affect your life as much as this does, right? Or
Oh, yeah.
whatever. So, and how it all affects our health and our longevity. Again, go back to the ACE study, 20 years longevity lost of your lifespan because of early childhood trauma and stress and how that affects us. So
Yeah.
it's actually absolutely remarkable. So thanks so much for taking your time during the holidays to join us.
No, thank you guys so much. And wish you guys a great Merry Christmas and enjoy the time with your families.
Yeah. Merry Christmas. Same to you.
Yeah.
Happy New
All right.
Year.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks.